The number one thing that I recommend is to begin with the end in mind. So today we're going to break down what does that even mean? Why do we care about that? And give some tips along the way of how to begin with the end in mind. Welcome to the Homeschool Next Steps podcast. I'm your host, Emily Eaton, the founder and academic coach at Education Next Steps, where we help homeschool parents equip their students for success in high school, college, and beyond. Let's jump into today's episode. Hi everyone, I am so excited for today because we are going to kick off a new series on the Homeschool Next Steps podcast that is 10 tips that I recommend to help your homeschool student pursue their next steps, such as college admissions, career, all those really exciting things. Now, I would say many of these tips are applicable for my non-homeschool students as well, but they are especially helpful for our homeschool students. And for the most part, these tips aren't in a particular order, but I would say today's tip is the number one thing that I recommend my homeschool families to be keeping in mind. So here's the tip. The number one thing that I recommend is to begin with the end in mind. So today we're going to break down what does that even mean? What does it look like to begin with the end in mind? Why do we care about that? Why should we begin with the end in mind? And give some tips along the way of how to begin with the end in mind. So what is it? Why do we care about it? And how do we even do that? Now, the first time that I was introduced to the idea of begin with the end in mind was honestly because it was advice that was given to me. When I was a high school student in my homeschool co-op, we were just kind of thinking about, okay, next steps. I think we were a high school sophomore or freshman around that time. My mom was talking to some other homeschool moms who had seniors and graduates go through homeschooling, and she was asking, what should we be thinking about? And the best advice, or what really stuck with us as we pursued our journey, was just that. Begin with the end in mind. And when I'm referring to end, I'm not necessarily talking about like end of life in mind. Although I'm a Christian, I think having those kinds of thoughts is really important for us to be thinking about. But we're really thinking about the end of homeschooling in mind. So where does your homeschool student want to end up? Because based on where they want to end up, that's the steps that we should be taking ahead of time. So what we mean by begin with the end in mind is your homeschool student thinking college? Are they thinking diving straight into career? Do they know what career option they're thinking about? Is your student thinking about being a scientist or being an artist or somewhere in between? And keep in mind, it's okay if their ideas change, especially because for some of us, we're thinking about an 8th grader, a 6th grader even, a 9th grader, a 10th grader. Honestly, even the average college student changes their major about 3 times. So I would say it's expected that our students will continue to change and evolve and think of new ideas and have new paths that they want to pursue. So don't be alarmed if they want to change their mind. But oftentimes we have students who are thinking college or thinking not college. And even if we're deciding what types of colleges are we considering, what different universities are of interest, that's going to change some of our decisions. So the what is, what are our next steps? What is this goal that we are even striving for? What is the end that we want to pursue? And we'll talk a little bit about how do we even determine that, because I'm sure that's the very next question. It would be my very next question. How do we even decide what career paths are interesting for our student? Some of your students might just know. They might have woken up today and they know exactly the answer, or maybe they have known that answer since they were really, really little, 4 or 5. But for others, they're still not certain, and that's okay. I will give some strategies in this video, in this conversation, of how to determine what is a helpful career path option, what might be a good fit for your student. But let's back up a little bit and talk about the why. Why is beginning with the end in mind my number one piece of advice that I would offer a homeschool student in any age, any grade? Why is that the number one piece? Well, it's because depending on what the end of our roadmap looks like, that is going to dictate a variety of decisions along the way. And now keep in mind, when it comes to the end in mind, I'm not so much in this conversation talking about type of a person or their character or their values, although I would say that's an even more important conversation than any of this. Developing wonderful people, I think, is a really important component. Strong values, making wise choices, that's all important. And those are things that you can instill better than anyone as their parent, and especially in a homeschool environment. But what I'm more so talking about is these educational and career-based next steps. Where are we headed? And so when it comes to the why, the end goal is going to require some different paths. Thankfully, we're not locked in to just one path along the journey. And so if your student says today they are college bound, that is where they want to head. They have a list of 2 or 3 colleges that they're thinking about. And then somewhere along the journey, they decide that's not the path they want to pursue. Thankfully, walking the path toward college bound tends to also help us if we're deciding that's not the path. We can often pivot and make new choices. I was talking to a client even a couple weeks ago, and they were mentioning just some struggles that their student was facing. I actually had 2 clients in a really similar situation, and both of these students were just it seemed overwhelmed by decision fatigue, feeling this analysis paralysis of just this. It's daunting to make what feels like a lifelong decision, but that's not the purpose of Begin with the End in Mind. It's not to stress out our student and make them feel locked into a career path, locked into a college option or choice. It's really to give us more options. Because if we get down the road and we decide actually we are wanting to pursue college, but we haven't taken some of the steps to get there, it's going to be more challenging for admissions to colleges, for scholarships, for a variety of reasons. So Begin with the End in Mind is not to put chains, it's to break them. It's to help us feel like we have more options, have more choices, have more peace along the journey. And don't worry, we will get to in a minute, what do we do if we're at our senior year and we're just now hearing this advice, we hadn't begun with the end in mind? How do we jump in with the end in mind? We'll talk about that a little bit today too. But the why Begin with the End in Mind matters. I think it's most important for 3 different reasons. Courses and transcripts, admissions requirements, and scholarships. And so all of that is really college bound. We will talk a little bit in this conversation about what if your student is not college bound, what are some of the next steps to be thinking about, because we're also going to talk about a timeline. But for now, let's start with that why and begin thinking about college focus. So let's say your student has decided they're college bound. They want to pursue a university. They don't know which one yet, that's okay. That's actually going to be what tip number 2 will focus on in our podcast series. So stay tuned for the next episode where we will discuss how do we even decide what colleges are good options for us and for our student. But let's say they decide they want to pursue a college and that college has some pretty strict requirements. Maybe they require certain courses to be taken. Maybe they require a certain level of accreditation to be taken for that course. Now, not every college is like this. Many colleges are very homeschool friendly. For instance, I work at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I'm an instructor of management there and worked in their admissions office for about 6 years. And they are a very homeschool friendly university. So the requirements for a public or private school student are the exact same requirements for a homeschool student. But not every university is like that. And so for some universities, there's these strict requirements. So your student decides they want to go to one university. Maybe it's a state university, an out-of-state public college, for instance. And they've decided that their senior year. Well, surprise, maybe that college has some strict requirements, some course requirements, some accreditation requirements that your student needs to have taken prior to even being able to apply. Now you're scrambling. You're trying to say, okay, how are we going to get this course? Do we need to get it in the summer? Do we need to fit it into our curriculum that is already packed with what we're doing, what we're focusing on? You don't have as much time to pivot. Whereas if you had decided with the end in mind that this was an option, doesn't mean it's the first university you're for sure going to, but it means you might be interested in that university. It's a possibility you want to be thinking about. Now we can plan. If we know that in middle school, in 9th grade, 10th grade, even if we know that in 11th grade, we still have at least 1 year to fit in that additional course, to do our accreditation requirement, whatever is necessary so that we're eligible for admission. So admissions requirements is a really important piece for why we want to begin with the end in mind in these conversations. The second piece is transcripts and course descriptions. Now this kind of falls into our admissions requirements. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, but some colleges, like for example, I gave the example of PBA, pretty open in terms of which format for a transcript that you do. They're pretty flexible. Other universities, not so flexible, require certain course descriptions that you're including for every single course that the student has taken. Put your transcript in a certain format, provide different proofs, such like that. I was actually just talking with a client recently, and they're looking mostly at some state universities in Florida, and not all, but some did require those course descriptions. Well, if we know that prior to our application year, our senior year, we can start jotting down those course descriptions as we go. It's going to save us a lot of time and a lot of headache. It's not impossible to do it in senior year, but it's going to save us and give us some peace if we, as we go, are adding those course descriptions for 9th grade, adding those course descriptions for 10th grade, et cetera, et cetera. So admissions process, admissions requirements, super important. Transcripts, course descriptions are requirements even for admission. Kind of two of the same coin, important. Scholarships are that last piece. And so if we know early we are college bound, we're maybe thinking private universities. Private universities tend to be, at least at sticker price, a little bit more expensive, although they're not always more expensive. There tends to be a lot more scholarships available to private university, but we can start planning for that well in advance. We can start doing test prep, which is one of our tips. We will come to that in a future episode, some best practices for test prep. And when I say test prep, I'm meaning SAT, ACT, CLT is a newer test. It's the classic learning test. But there tends to be a vast amount of scholarships available based on those test scores. There's also other scholarships we can look into, and some scholarships even open up in a student's sophomore year, junior year, earlier on in their high school timeline. And so if we know in advance that we're looking at a college that would require needing some scholarships to be able to afford it, we can plan. The whole heart of the idea of we need to begin with the end in mind is rooted in the idea of we want to plan ahead when we can. Now, that's not always possible for everyone, but I would say that is an ideal situation to be able to plan ahead. So the main reasons we want to plan ahead, we want to begin with the end in mind, is for ease, for peace of mind in making our transcripts and creating course descriptions to save us time. It's for admissions requirements, make sure we are meeting all of those admissions requirements for colleges, and it's for scholarships. Make sure we can manage the cost of our dream university. Now, when it comes to beginning with the end in mind, when am I talking about? When should we start thinking about the end in mind? Well, I'm going to give 3 different scenarios. What I would say is a perfect world scenario, what I would say is ideal, and then what I would say is often reality. So let's start with this perfect world type of a situation, and we don't really live in a perfect world, so this might not be your situation, and that's okay. Perfect world situation would be to start beginning with the end in mind even in middle school. Now, I'm not saying that a middle school student needs to or even should be decided on what college they're thinking about having a perfect career plan in mind, because that is probably going to change. We tend to change a lot in high school, right? But what I am saying is let's at least walk the path and assume our student wants to be college bound and start planning for that option. I have one client comes to mind, for instance, who we meet on a yearly basis to make sure that her student is taking the right courses in middle school to prepare for the right courses in high school to prepare for college. And so middle school I see as a really big preparation time. We talked about that in the previous episode, so check it out if you're looking for some tips regarding study skills, note-taking, and time management. But I think middle school is the perfect time to begin instilling those skills. But it's also the building blocks for high school coursework. And some middle school students are even getting high school coursework accomplished, and that's an option. Great if we're thinking we're college bound, for instance, checking off some boxes, freeing up some space for scholarships, testing, dual enrollment potentially, and we'll talk more about dual enrollment in a future episode. But I would say that is a perfect world because we aren't always planning for high school and beyond when it comes to middle school. we're oftentimes really just focused on what are we doing in middle school? And that's a valid question. It's something that's important to be thinking about and focusing on. I don't think we should have our entire mindset in the future when we're working with our middle school student. Enjoying the present, enjoying each day as it comes is important, but kind of keeping one eye open for what's next, what are we planning for high school, and at least being prepared for college is why I think that makes it such a perfect world scenario. Now, what I would say is ideal is starting to think about this in early high school. And I would define early high school as 9th and 10th grade, maybe beginning of 11th, but more so 9th and 10th grade. So the reason I think this is ideal is we're in high school, so what's our next step? It's college or career. And so this is a really important time for us to start thinking of what's coming. But I think it's ideal in a couple other ways. So if we go back to our main three, transcripts and course descriptions, academic admissions requirements, and scholarships, all three of these matter for early high school. And so in 9th and 10th grade, this is when we should be starting our high school transcript. And I think that's an important time to start with the high school transcript, because otherwise you're gonna have a senior and you're gonna try to remember, what did we even do 4 years ago? You've changed curriculums, you've had life happen, there's been a lot going on, and you might not be able to recall to mind what were all the choices that we did. And so maybe you can recall that to mind, but now you're having to document 4 years worth of work. Whereas if you had done a little bit at a time, a little bit in 9th grade, a little bit in 10th grade, so on and so forth, it saves you a lot of time, gives you a lot of peace. And if you need some support in creating a transcript, I would be happy to help with that process. Go ahead and schedule a consultation if you'd like to. I'm happy to send you my transcript template, or I can also even just make the high school transcript for you. So any way that you'd like support, I'm here to help. But if we're looking at course descriptions, for instance, it's another thing. Do you want to have to remember 4 years worth of course descriptions? Probably not. So doing that early just saves you time, saves you a lot of headache and hassle. Admissions requirements, we've already talked about how some universities have requirements in terms of accomplishing a certain course or having a certain accreditation. I was working with one client, for instance, who was looking at an out-of-state university that required at least some of the courses be taken through an accredited school, not just homeschool. So she ended up dual enrolling for some of these courses, checked that box, checked off some college credit, made her eligible for admission at that university. If we are thinking about that in 9th and 10th grade, we have time. We can easily fit in those courses to our junior or senior year. We're not sitting there stressed about how are we going to fit this in. And then the scholarship piece is important too, because I believe the majority of scholarships come from testing. Fortunately or unfortunately, we could talk about that more at a future time, but doing test prep is really helpful because very few students are just jumping into SAT, ACT, CLT and getting their dream score on the first try. Oftentimes it takes practice, preparation, work in order to get that score. And so starting that process in 9th and 10th grade is going to help get that score in junior, senior year. It's also a great time to start jumping into community service, leadership, crafting your student's story, because we want to share this whole picture of what makes your student so wonderful, so special, so unique. And every student is so wonderful, so special, so unique. But oftentimes it's about getting them involved in the right opportunities and then communicating those opportunities effectively so that they can be a great candidate for these scholarships. And we'll talk more about scholarships on a future episode. But I would say that's an ideal time. It's not often our case. Many times students and families come to me with a junior in high school or a senior in high school, and that's okay. I love helping those students and families. And there's often a lot that we can do. And so I would say that's a realistic situation. Realistically, but not ideally. So if you have a freshman, a sophomore, middle schooler, start early, plan early, begin with the end in mind. But if you have a junior or senior in high school, there is still hope. There's still quite a bit that we can do. And so what does that look like? It again looks like, let's look at scholarships. Let's look at admissions requirements. Let's create a transcript. Let's make sure that we are checking the boxes and doing what we need to do for our next steps. It's going to be easier the earlier on in the journey. easier for a junior year student to be working on these steps than a senior year student in August. But a senior year student in August is going to be easier than a senior year student in May. And a senior year student in May is going to be easier than a senior year student in the next July, right? And so there's often a lot that we can do, and I'm happy to help you along that journey. But we're going to have to condense our process a little bit more. Whereas we had steps spread out over 4 years if we started the process in 9th grade, we now have to do all those steps of the process in junior or senior year in order to meet the admissions requirements, have the transcript and course descriptions, or have our scholarships accomplished. So now that we've really overviewed what does it mean to begin with the end in mind and why should we care about that, I think we have to take a step back even further and say, how do we even begin with the end in mind? Well, I think the number one question that it comes to is, what are some potential careers that your student is thinking about? Because the career path and the next steps for someone wanting to jump into being a car mechanic looks a lot different than someone who wants to jump in to be a surgeon, which also looks a lot different from someone who wants to jump in and be a musician. And there's everything in between, right? Those are just 3 very vast differences, very different career paths that have some different next steps that we need to be thinking about. Your student might already have that figured out. But my favorite resource to recommend to families to help with navigating and determining what are career paths that are a good fit for my student is called the My Next Move assessment. It's mynextmove.org, and I love this assessment because it's completely free. It's put out by the Department of Labor, which means it's going to be providing really up-to-date information in terms of what's the job outlook for this career path. Is it growing? Is it declining? What's the average salary? And you can look at this by region, you can look at this nationwide, but it's really helpful because it isn't just, these are some careers that sound interesting, but it gives some facts related to that. Is it growing? What's the salary? It also talks about level of education necessary for it, talks about what does it look like to be on that job, what are the skills that are necessary, what does the day-to-day look like. Gives a lot of information. I often joke that you could spend your lifetime looking through the My Next Move assessment. But I recommend taking a look at that. It's a 10-minute free assessment. I'll put the link in the show notes for you. And if you would like some help interpreting your results, I would be glad to help in that process. Go ahead and schedule a consultation with me and I'd be happy to help you navigate that. But I really love the My Next Move assessment because it's free, because it's put out by Department of Labor, which I think is a really good source for this information. But I also love it because I've seen it to be accurate for me. Now, that doesn't mean it's accurate for every single student. I have had some students look at it and say, this doesn't seem like the right option for me, but I've seen it be so helpful for some students. So the way it works is you take this quick 10-minute assessment, and they're super fun. It's like, what does this sound fun to you? Like, one of the questions was, would the idea of writing a play or a book appeal to you? And you say like, yes, that sounds fun, or no, that sounds horrible, or somewhere in between. And it's about 30 questions, and then it will tell you how do you rank on 6 different interests. So the 6 interests are realistic, investigative, enterprising, social, conventional, and artistic. Realistic is, I like to do work with my hands, manual labor, that type of thing. Investigative tends to be very math, science, data-oriented. Conventional tends to be quite organized, administrative potentially. Enterprising tends to be very business-oriented, or it could be law-oriented as well. Social tends to be liking to help people. And then artistic, I think, is probably how it sounds, enjoying art, music, theater, dance, painting, that type of thing. So you take that assessment and it will tell you, here are your top 3, but it will also tell you, how do you rank on all 6? After that, you get to select what's called a job zone. Now, a job zone means what level of education, essentially, are you wanting to do? So job zone 1 and 2 and even 3 essentially are saying either no, high school's not even completed, or just a high school diploma. Job zone 4 means a bachelor's degree, and job zone 5 typically means a master's or a higher level degree than a bachelor's degree. So I admit, I did not take this assessment when I was in college or in high school. I didn't know this existed. I wish that I did, but I didn't. And so I took it after the fact when I started helping high school students and college students with these questions. I've taught a first-year experience course at Palm Beach Atlantic University, and we do this assessment there, for instance, for our college students. And I also taught a business professionalisms course, and we also did it there for our college students. And so I've walked students through this process, and I said, I want to know, how would I do? What did it look like for me? So I took the assessment, and my top 3 interests are enterprising, social, and conventional. So I like business, that makes sense. I studied management in my undergrad. I do have an MBA. Social, I really love helping people. That's something that's been a passion of mine for a long time. And conventional, I tend to be pretty organized, and I do like some administrative work, for instance. Now, for me, I picked Job Zone 4 and 5 because I have Job Zone 4 and 5. I have a bachelor's and I have a master's degree. But you don't have to click on those if you're a student saying, no way, I don't want to pursue college, or you want to see the options of what would it look like to dive into a career without having a college degree. But for me, I went ahead and put in Job Zone 4 and 5. And here's what blew me away. Now, granted, I'm after the fact, not before, but if I go back and I think through what were some jobs that high school and college Emily were thinking about, and what are jobs that I've actually stepped into and have enjoyed, every single one of them came up on that list for me. So when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to start a nonprofit to benefit kids. Nonprofit manager, religious director, for instance, that was one of my top options based on my 3 interests and my job zones. When I was in college, I thought about event planning. I thought about being a trainer, not an athletic trainer, I would be really bad at that, but thinking about like training and development at a corporation, for instance. I thought about human resources. All of those came up as a top interest for me top career for me based on my interests. Some careers I actually did jump into: worked in college admissions for 6 years, was a director of admissions for two of those years. A post-secondary or college administrator was one of the top career options that came up for me. Now have Education Next Steps, where I get to work with students and families and do educational coaching, career coaching. A top career option for me was more career guidance help. I'm also a business professor. Post-secondary business education was one of those career options for me. So I love this assessment because every single career path that I loved or that I considered is one of my options based on my interests. And so that's where I would start. I think it would be helpful for any level of high school or a college student to go ahead and take it, but earlier is always better because you can begin with the end in mind. But it doesn't hurt for a middle schooler to take it too. It's, again, a free assessment. It takes you about 10 minutes. And if you would like help interpreting your results, looking through different career options and choices, I would love to get to help you with that as well. Now, I mentioned the job zones 1 through 3 don't require a college degree. But we've been talking a lot when it comes to begin with the end in mind about college focus. Now, if your student is not a junior or senior in high school, I would walk toward the college path, because if your student changes their mind later and says, oh wait, I do want to do college, it will be easier to have already walked that path than if they later change their mind and say, actually, I don't want to do college. That's a much easier pivot. And so I do recommend walking the path toward college, even if your student doesn't think they're college bound, unless you know for certain that that's not where they're headed, because there are some additional steps for those 3: transcripts and course descriptions, admissions requirements, and scholarships that are important to walk the process for college bound. But let's say your student is a senior in high school. They have already decided they are not going the college route. They want to be going into a trade program, or they want to just jump into their career. They've selected job zone 1 through 3. They're ready to dive in. What are some next steps that we should be thinking about in that case? Well, you could still apply to college if you wanted to. You could still walk that path. It doesn't hurt to walk that path. But there are other next steps that you can pursue. The main 2 that I really love recommending to students who are thinking more trade school routes, and there are some scholarship options for trade schools, so some of those begin with the end in mind. College-bound steps also fit for trade schools, but for really any student, but especially those students who want to jump right into a career, but honestly, any student, The two things that I recommend are job shadowing and informational interviews. And if we were to add a third, I would also say volunteer experiences. All three of those are really helpful for any student, but they're really helpful next steps for students wanting to jump right into career and not pursue college, because there's less of a roadmap, less time before jumping into career if they're not going the college option. A lot of times students use college as a time of career exploration and discovery to say, is this a path I really like? Do I even like these classes? Should I change my major? If they're jumping right into career, they aren't having that time to explore and say, is this the right fit for me? And so informational interviews and job shadowing and volunteer is going to give them the opportunity to have this discernment. Do I want to do this career option? Do I even like this? Before they've jumped into the career full-fledged. So an informational interview is simply setting up a time to talk with someone who's already in that space, already doing that career. It's not trying to get a job, it's just picking their brain. What do you like about your job? What's a typical day like? What are skills that you use? What are some things that'd be helpful to do in high school to prepare me for that job, for that career? It will help give the student an insight to say, do I even like this? Taking that a step further is job shadowing. And maybe that's the result of the informational interview. Could I come follow you around for a day and just you show me what you do? Not everyone will be open to that, but many places would be. And so it's just the idea of, I want to see and explore. I think I like the idea of being a mechanic, but maybe I don't. Maybe I just like it in concept and not in reality. How do I know? And so job shadowing could allow you to get to explore and see that. This idea of just wanting to see and explore what is that like can be really helpful. And then the last piece is volunteering. I am a huge fan of volunteering for a lot of reasons. One, it's just a good thing for us to do as people. It's a way to give back to a community, but it also fills us up, which is really wonderful and special. Two, it looks great for scholarship applications, for college applications, and we want college admissions, we want scholarships, so that's really helpful. But three, it helps us decide, do I even like this? Is this something I would enjoy? Is this something I could see myself doing, for instance? Volunteering takes that informational interview and job shadowing a further step, because you're not just reading about it in a career assessment, hearing about it in an informational interview, seeing it in a job shadowing, you're actually doing it. You're living it. And so you're at least a slice of that. So you're getting to see, is this something I would enjoy? And I love doing that early, beginning with the end in mind, because it gives you time to pivot if you don't like it. There's other options. And so that's really the heart of beginning with the end in mind. It's planning and allowing time to pivot if we need to. I know this doesn't answer every question that you probably have. This is only tip number 1. So we have 9 more tips coming in this series where we will discuss items such as how do you decide what colleges to consider? How do you find scholarships? How do you earn scholarships? Should you pursue dual enrollment? And a variety of different items. But for now, I encourage you to start having conversations with your student. Do they know what they're thinking about career-wise? Could they jump into doing the My Next Move assessment? What are the next steps that you're taking to help you begin with the end in mind? If you need a little bit more support in determining what is my next step, how can I begin with the end in mind for my student's path, whether that's making curriculum choices in middle school, taking the My Next Move assessment in 9th, 10th grade, or applying to colleges and scholarships in your senior year or your junior year, I would be happy to help in that process. So please go ahead and schedule a consultation or a coaching session. I would love to hear your students' individual situation and story. I would love to help you, and I'm here to be your coach along this process. Stay tuned for our next episode of Homeschool Next Steps. I'll see you there, and I'm looking forward to it.